My name is Vaughn, and I'm a singer in Phoenix Chamber Choir, a community choir based in Vancouver, Canada. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about us, check out our website, phoenixchoir.com, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can see the virtual choir videos that we've produced so far. This is the second video in a two-part series where we're trying to share what we've learned about making virtual choir videos on a budget. This second video focuses on the technical aspect of creating your final video using Final Cut Pro. If you want to learn more about how to organize a virtual choir video, how to get advice to your singers to make the best videos possible, how to collect those videos, you want to see part 1, and there's a link to that in the comments below. This video assumes that you've already done that and you now on your computer have a folder full of singer videos ready to go. I want to take a second to let you know that we do not have a professional video editor in our organization, and I am not a professional video editor. This is not what I do for a living. If you have some advice for us, please leave it in the comments. We'd love to read about it. The other thing I'd like to say is that we have not been paid by any of the makers of any of these products. So before we get right into how to create these videos, let's talk a little bit about the equipment that you'll need. Obviously, the first thing you're going to need is a computer. Most relatively modern computers will handle a video like this without any difficulty, as long as there's only 4 to 8 singers. If you're going to be doing more than that, you may want to see about using a computer that has a little bit more power. When you're looking at computers, you should look at, first of all, how much RAM does your computer have, which is the memory that allows it to do multiple things at the same time. And you want 16 to 32 gigs of that if you can. More is better. The second thing that you'll need to look at is whether or not the computer has a separate graphics processor. What that means is that not only does it have the regular processor that runs the computer, it also has a separate processor with its own RAM that is specifically suited for graphics. Many computers will come with a separate graphics card. The last thing that you need to consider with your computer is whether or not you have enough hard drive space to make this project. I'll show you a couple of ways to save space while you're working in Final Cut Pro, but you really do want about 100 gigs of space available. If that's on your computer, that's great if you have that space. If not, there's a couple of solutions. One is to buy a really fast external hard drive that is probably a solid state drive and connected by USB 3 or Thunderbolt. And then you can keep your project on the hard drive. The other option is to buy a less expensive hard drive, move a bunch of your stuff from your computer onto that hard drive to make space while you do the project, and then move it back when you're done. Once you've got your computer organized, the next step is to choose a piece of software. In this video, we're focusing on Final Cut Pro X, which is an Apple product. And we chose that because we're using Apple computers. However, our first 2 videos were actually made using a different piece of software called Camtasia. And this is something that I've used in the past for teaching. It works really well, but as soon as we got to the point where we wanted different layouts of singers, it ended up getting a little bit cumbersome to pull that off. You can also use something like iMovie, but it's really laborious in the way you actually make multiple frames. It's really worth it to try Final Cut Pro. The other reason we chose Final Cut Pro is because they had a 90-day free trial running at the time, and I think they still do, where it allows you full functionality of the software for 90 days to try it out. If you have a mixture of PC and Mac, or you're using PCs, I would look at Adobe Premiere Pro. Now that you've got your computer and your software organized, it's time to actually start editing. So the first thing you want to do is set up your file. When you first go to create a file, you'll have to create a library first. Final Cut Pro files are found within libraries. So you want to decide where you want to save your library. For this one, I'll just put it into the movies folder, but if you had an external hard drive, you would save it there. I'm going to call this demo library. And then once I have the library created, I can then make a new project. Now, before you start adding videos or anything like that, what you want to do is make a couple of changes to this file. First of all, select the project and go over here to Modify. In Modify, you'll want to make sure that this says 4K and that this says 60 frames per second. Another really important thing that we learned is that the smallest adjustment you can make when you're trying to line videos up is 1 frame. So we found that the default of 30 frames per second, which is what most normal TV is run at, or roughly that, didn't give us enough ability to adjust those tracks together. Finally, go to Final Cut Pro, Preferences, and disable background rendering. By doing this, you've prevented the program from preemptively doing some of the final video creation or the actual rendering of the final video before you're finished. The reason this setting exists is so that your rendering time when you actually go to output your final video is short, because the computer has kind of done some of the work ahead of time. Unfortunately, this fills your hard drive up really, really quickly. So the easiest thing to do is to turn it off. One thing you should know is that you don't have to actually save your file in Final Cut Pro. It's continuously saving for you, which is handy. The other really handy thing to know is that every time you close the file, it will save a version of your project in the Final Cut Backups folder. If you ever realize that you've made a mistake and you want to go back, you can find that folder and open up the project as it was the last time you closed the program. Let's talk about the timeline for a minute. Different bits of video or clips are organized by where they intersect with the main clip or primary storyline. Imagine that what you see on the final video is actually determined by looking down from the top. So all of the things above the primary storyline will be seen and will actually cover up the primary storyline unless you move things around, which we'll show you how to do in a minute. It's helpful to use a background though, because if you have all of these loose clips, they're not really tied to anything. So what you need to do is put something in your primary timeline. There's 2 real options. One is to actually use this feature here to actually generate just a black rectangle. You can change the color, or you could even put a photo here and then drag the photo if you want a background of a starry sky or something like that. The other option, if you used a cue track or a video conducting track, is to use that as your primary timeline, which actually makes it a little easier to line videos up. Don't worry, you don't have to have that guide track in your final video. You can disable it by highlighting it and using the keyboard shortcut V, and you can see that it disappears. Before you add your videos, it's really helpful to organize them into a single folder on your computer and label them with names that make sense. Quite often, the easiest thing to do is to put either an S for soprano and then the name of the singer, as you can see here in our folder. It just allows you to keep better track of putting everyone in, and it organizes everybody nicely in your folder. But before you actually put the files into the software, we need to adjust a couple of settings. So if you go here, back under Final Cut Pro Preferences, you'll find a bunch of other modifiable settings as well. If you go to importing, there's a couple of things we want to change. One is to tell it to leave files in place so that it won't create a copy of every file, which is just a waste of hard drive space. And the second is to tell it to create proxy media. Proxy media is a duplicate of your original video, but at a much lower quality. It allows your computer to do all of this editing using a much smaller file. So especially if your computer is maybe a little bit underpowered for what you're trying to do, using proxy media is really, really, really important. The only thing you need to know is that when you actually go to export your final file, you need to go back here under View, and instead of proxy media, choose Original Media, and then you'll actually be able to export with the full quality. If you forget to do this, Final Cut Pro will remind you. Now it's time to actually add videos to your project. And the easiest way to do that is to simply click them and drag them onto your timeline. You can see here that I've used my guide track as a background. I need to line my video up, but it's actually quite difficult when all I see is the face of the person. You can also hear a really kind of annoying playback of the audio as I move my mouse. It's not really helpful, and honestly, this is one of the first things I figured out how to turn off when I started using the software, and you can do that right here with this button. Now is a good time to show you that you can also change how you view clips in the timeline using this button here. While sometimes you'll want to see people's faces, most of the time you'd rather actually see the waveform of their audio, and you can do that here. And now you can see that on my guide track, the shape of the waveform is roughly similar to the shape of the waveform for the singer. So what I'm able to do is actually drag the clip over until it's quite close. When it looks like it's pretty well lined up, the next thing I want to do is actually zoom in. You can zoom in using some of these buttons, but the easiest thing to remember is the command key and either the plus or the minus sign will actually zoom in and out. You can see that you're pretty close. With that track highlighted, you can use the comma and period keys to actually step the video forward or back by 1 frame at a time. This is the reason that we choose 60 frames per second instead of 30 frames per second, because it gives us twice as much sensitivity in where we can line things up, or it's twice as accurate. Once you've got your first video lined up, you can temporarily disable it by using V and then add the next video. Once you have all your videos in place, you can enable them all and then listen to it all together. So now you've got all your videos loaded in, but before you even consider moving people around or doing any editing in any videos, you want to make sure that you make a decision about whether or not you're going to edit the audio yourself or you're going to have somebody else do this. Although we're talking about how to do this on a budget, a lot of choirs have somebody in their organization that's pretty good with audio. I really can't recommend enough the value of a professional sound engineer on a video like this. If you're gonna spend money, spend it on your audio engineer, because it will really make the difference between a really kind of okay video and a great sounding video. If you're going to export your audio and send it to a separate person to do that editing, or even if you want to separate it and do that editing in a different piece of software, the easiest thing to do is to assign each video their own audio role, or each singer their own audio role. And you can do that by going into their video, right-click, and then assign an audio role. You can see that there's a couple of these automatically generated roles, but what you'll want to do is go down to Edit Roles and create a new role for each singer. I like to name each role the same as the video track, and then I like to also change the color so that all of the voice parts are the same color. This can be really, really handy. In our What We All Gotta Do video, we had almost 100 singers from multiple choirs. We had to assign these audio roles in order to export all the files, but it also allowed us to keep track of which choirs were on the screen at any given time and to know where we were when we were navigating through this file. Once you've assigned all these roles, and don't worry, you can click either the main one or the sub role, it doesn't matter. Once they've all been assigned, you can go to File, Share, Master File, and then under the settings, choose Audio Only. Then go to Roles and select Audio Only as separate files, and then you'll see all of your singers populate down here. The audio of each of these roles will save as a separate WAV file, which you can send to your audio editor or edit in another program. Before you export, you can also remove any of the roles you don't need, like dialogue, which is automatically generated by Final Cut Pro. If you're going to edit the audio yourself in Final Cut Pro, we really recommend at this point separating the audio from the video files. This is so that the audio remains intact, even if only some of the singers are on the screen at any given time. So to detach the audio, what you do is right-click, detach audio from video, and the audio will fall down below the timeline, and then you can turn it on and off there. And it's the same thing by highlighting and using V to turn it on and off. You can also adjust the volume of each track by grabbing this little slider here and moving it up and down. You can also grab this little tab and drag it over to fade the volume up, or at the back to fade the volume down. So what you do is once you've detached all the audio, adjust the volume of each track until you're happy with the mix. Now it's time to arrange the videos. This would be a really boring video if you could only see one singer at a time. So the next step is to move them all around. To do this, highlight one of the singers in the track and use these controls here below the video. Transform allows you to move and resize the video. Crop and trim allow you to actually literally crop and trim the video. Crop crops to the project aspect ratio, and trim can actually move can actually cut away pieces of the video and make it a different aspect ratio or different shape. Using these, you can move your singers around and get them into whatever arrangement you like. If you're happy with the way this looks for the whole video, you can leave it like this. Otherwise, you can cut your video into different sections. To do this, you can highlight all the videos and use the keyboard shortcut B to blade or cut each video at the same spot. Or you can blade them all by using Command, Shift, and B together, and it will cut them all at the playhead. Then go through this process again, move your singers around, resize, whatever you'd like to do. Once you've got a handle on the basics, there's a few things you can do to help tidy things up or make it a little bit easier to have a nice clean video. There's a free plugin called GridX Pro that can really help with this. And there are links to how you download and install this plugin in the comments. If you put this grid on the very top of your project, you can adjust the number of lines and how thick the lines are to cover up all kinds of sloppiness. You can also blade or cut the grid and change and move it between different sections to have different arrangements. If you want video to actually occupy multiple spaces on the grid, then what you do is actually put the video on top of the grid and then very carefully resize and trim the video to fit over the grid so you can't really tell that it's over the grid. You can also move videos around a little bit more easily if you calculate the coordinates of the center of each of these positions in your grid. Once you've calculated it, you can do something like this, and it allows you to simply click on a video and then put in the coordinates that you want, and you can even put in the size that you want and hit enter, and the video just snaps to where you want it to go. It's a little bit more work ahead of time to actually do that calculation, but if you have a lot of singers, it's very, very, very helpful. You can also make some adjustments to the videos themselves by making some cuts and either moving things or removing things. This can be really helpful if somebody enters slightly out of time or claps slightly out of time. The way you do this is by making a couple of cuts in the video, shortening it slightly, moving it to where you want it to go, and then moving it and then extending it back in to be seamless. The important thing to remember is that once you've done this, you can't move this clip physically in your video as easily because now it's actually 3 different clips. If you want to put the clip back together again, you have to create a compound clip. If you're going to do this, I suggest you watch a couple of videos on compound clips and figure out how they work. Also, if you're going to do this, the best time is between lining up all your videos and detaching the audio for export for the audio editor. If you do this after, your video and audio won't line up. We haven't really talked about transitions in this video. Transitions are a way to fade from one clip into another clip. The only difficulty with some of the transitions in Final Cut is that they will use up a little bit of the clip in order to do that transition. And sometimes you'll end up getting out of time by using a transition. There's another way to do it where you actually right-click on the file and go to Show Video Animation. If you then double-click on opacity, you can actually fade the same way that you adjust the volume on a track. If you just want to fade in and out, this is the easiest way to do it. You'll undoubtedly want to put credits at the end of your video, titles at the beginning of your video, and you may even want to put the lyrics of your video on the screen as you are singing. Final Cut Pro makes this really easy, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. However, you simply add titles and credits using these features here. If you want lyrics on your video, you just create titles that last as long as you want them on screen. You can see the lyrics in this video lined up along the top. Editing the text in these is quite simple. You just have to find the right section within this area here. The time has finally come to export your video. You can do this by going to File, Share, and then you choose one of these settings. Apple 4K is probably fine. 4K is plenty of quality for anything you're planning to do with it, but there's a lot of different versions here or different file formats you can choose from. Once you click Save, the computer will plug away creating the final file. This can take a while. It can be 45 minutes or an hour, sometimes less if you've got a really powerful computer, but give it time. When it's done, it'll appear on your hard drive. I really suggest you watch through the whole video and make sure you're happy with it. It's not uncommon to have to export it multiple times as you find little things that you missed, but when you've got something you're happy with, you can take that file and upload it to YouTube or Facebook or whichever social media or online streaming you're planning to use. Thanks for hanging in to the end of the video. We really hope we've answered your questions here, but we're sure that you're going to have more questions as you go along. The best thing to do if you need more help is to search Google or YouTube with your question and include FCPX. This will make sure that you get all relevant answers to Final Cut Pro. I really hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please subscribe to our channel, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram so that you can keep up to date with what we release in the future. If you have comments or questions, please leave them below and we'll do our best to get back to you. Happy singing!